Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. Now, in my last video, we looked at how hitting off practice mats could hide a low point error. If you haven't seen that video yet, be sure to head back to my page and check out the video. It'll give you the context of what we're going to look at today. Now, from that video, in the comments, a lot of you mentioned, okay, I now understand that hitting off a mat means I can basically get away with hitting the ground before the golf ball, but how do I get my low point further forward? And getting the low point further forward is what's going to give us ball and then turf contact and help us flush our irons. Well, that's what today's video is all about. We're going to break it down into the 4 components you need to know about that are going to help you ensure that low point gets far enough forward that you can hit ball and turf and start flushing your irons. Before we get into the components that are going to affect where your low point is relative to the golf ball, we need to understand one key thing, and that is that your low point is not necessarily where your club hits the ground. When it comes to low point, we often talk about it in terms of is the low point after the golf ball or before the golf ball, but there is also a depth element to the low point as well. Now, what that means is that I could have my low point well after the golf ball, but if the depth of my low point is too deep, in other words, the bottom of the arc, the bottom of the circle is too far into the ground, I could have my low point well forward, but still hit the ground well before the golf ball. So that's a key thing to understand when it comes to low point. Now, in this video, I'm simply going to be talking about the components linking to its position before and after the golf ball. As with everything in the golf swing, it all interlinks, so these different components will affect each other. And as well as that, it'll also affect the depth of the arc as well. But we're going to keep it nice and simple. We're going to keep it to before and after when we talk about the low point position today. Now, when we look at low point, the first thing that's really important to understand is that typically a nice way to recognize where your low point is to think of it as it's underneath your lead shoulder. So that's the left shoulder for a right-hander. Now, the reason we would use this as the measurement point for low point is because essentially, if I were to swing the club and to lengthen my arm out, extend my elbow, my wrist and everything as far as I could, that is basically as far away from me as I can get the club. So that is the lowest point of the golf swing. If I start to add any flexion through my wrist or any bend in my elbow, that in turn is pushing the low point further back and further up. So we use the left shoulder as the reference for low point. And that brings us really nicely into our first component that's going to affect our low point position relative to the golf ball, and that is ball position. Now, when we're talking ball position, most of the time, we would reference it versus our feet. Now, this is a way of doing it, and it's usually a nice way to get across the point of where we'd like the ball to be positioned. However, it can sometimes cause some errors, and that would be if my lead shoulder is not in an appropriate position, I could have the ball anywhere in my stance and still have the low point in the wrong place. So as a simple example, we've got 9-9 in my hand here. We typically say the ball position for that would be middle of the stance. Okay, so equal distance between my left and right foot. But the issue is that if I were to have a position with my left shoulder that was too far back like this, you can now see that my left shoulder is moved almost behind the golf ball, meaning that the low point is moved further back. In the same vein, I could have the ball actually really far forward in my stance, which we would think would push the low point further back like we would do a driver. But if I have my upper body or my lead shoulder sitting too far forward, I have in turn now pushed the low point well after the golf ball. So I'm kind of negating the effects of changing the ball position in my stance. Now, the reason why we would use our feet to reference ball position is because we can actually see it. Now, I know you could look over and see a lead shoulder, but it's quite hard to get an understanding of where it is in space to the same specificity or to the same degree as you could do from looking down at your stance. So that's why we'll typically use that as a reference. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit you almost like I'm going to hit you my stock shot with my 9-9 here. I'm going to leave the ball center of stance, or as it were, 3 to 4 balls behind my lead shoulder joint there. And I'm going to show you the low point numbers from this shot. Okay, so stock 9-iron, my low point is 4.5 inches after the golf ball for it. And that's not far off where I'd want it to be. It depends player to player, it also depends on what shot shape. But low point being 4.5 inches after the golf ball with a 9-iron, you're just about right. So what I'm going to do now, I'm very simply going to change my ball position. So I'm going to put the ball now just inside my left heel. Assuming I do everything, let's say neutrally, I don't change anything drastically in my swing, that low point should drop a lot closer to 0. So big thing from there is a much kind of nippier strike. It nipped it off the surface, and low point went to 0.4. So immediately there we can see by getting the ball position too far forward, or further forward I should say, we can immediately change where the low point position is relative to the golf ball. We flip it on its head now, and I'm going to put this thing way back in my stance. Just going off the inside of my right heel. Same thing, I'm going to try and make as neutral a swing as I can. I'm not going to change anything too much. Much lower ball flight, much more compressed as it were, and low point jumped up to 6.7 or 7 inches after the golf ball. So you can see the effects there by having the ball position different. But once again, we have to understand that ball position, yes, referencing it to the feet is a nice way to go about it, but we've got to be aware where that lead shoulder is. And just to give an example of this, if I were to put the ball further back in my stance, but I then also tilted my upper body back, and this will link into the second component we're going into a second. So obviously my lead shoulder is much further back now. Remember, this produced 7 inches after the golf ball in the previous shot. So the ball position is back, but my lead shoulder's back now. You can see I've hit the ground before the golf ball there. And so in turn, yeah, low point drops down to, well, 0.4 again, actually. So what's happening is because I'm getting the lead shoulder further back, despite the ball position being further back relative to my feet, the lead shoulder is further back. That means that the low point in turn is going further back. So that's the first thing to really be aware of, is that if you're somebody who struggles with fatting your golf shots or thinning your golf shots, checking your ball position is a big one. And I always like, as a reference, when I start off, anything up to about a 7-iron, I would have underneath my sternum, okay? Or if you like, underneath the buttons on my shirt. That would be a starting point. And then, of course, as we go up in the clubs, we would start to push the ball further forward to allow us to produce a shallower swing, a shallower angle attack through the golf ball, which we need for those longer clubs. So there's your first component, ball position. Reference it to the feet as a visual, but understand it is in reference to the lead shoulder in terms of where the low point actually is. So moving on to component number 2 when it comes to low point, and that would be our weight. All right, now I don't want to get into the nitty gritty in terms of pressure and weight. I'm going to look at this from 2 sides. There's going to be the static element, so what I do when I'm setting up, standing still, and then there is a dynamic element as well. So what I'm going to do this time, I'm going to keep the ball position centered. I'm not going to change ball position, but I'm simply going to move around with my weight. So we saw my stock one earlier on was 4.4 inches after the golf ball. What I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to preset my weight more on my trail side. Now this in turn, you can already see, to push my weight further back, my lead shoulder comes with me, so you can probably already guess what's going to happen here. Play it off the back foot, as it were, getting away with it because of the fairway, because of the practice mat. So you can see there, usually 4.4, that one was 1.9. So weight further back meant I got low point further back, which meant I was still, low point still after the golf ball, but I was further back, which meant I reduced it. If I did the opposite now, and I were to push all of my weight further forward, again, these shoulders moving further forward, and I swing from here. Much lower ball flight once again. Low point goes to 8.5, so well after the golf ball. And there is a point at which the low point can get too far forward, because if you go extreme with it, you could start thinning it on the other side. But typically, if you get low point really far forward, it brings in elements of taking too much loft off of the club, so we can't get the ball high enough to get it to stop on a green. And also, as we go further forward, you may notice that as I push further forward, I also lower down. And that's one of those things that would start to affect the height of the low point. If I'm getting further forward, great, the low point's all the way over there, but I get lower down to the ground. So if I do, with component number 3, we're going to go on to in a second, if I were to unload my wrists a little bit earlier, I could still bury the thing down into the ground before the golf ball, despite the fact that the low point is well after it. So I mentioned there that there was a static side to weight and there is a dynamic side to weight. So dynamic, simply how we're moving our weight as we're making the golf swing, as we are moving. I could start with all of my weight on my lead foot. I'm presetting the low point way after the golf ball. But if I were to, from this position, make a swing and then move my weight back through impact, probably a common sight you see on the golf course, you'll immediately see my low point drops back to 1. So weight was further forward. When I kept it there, I got the low point 8.5 after the golf ball. If I move it back through impact, I'm just doing the dynamic movement and move my weight back. Low point then in turn starts to get too far back. Now, the key thing with this is that we want to move it the other way. We want to see our weight actually move forward through the golf ball. And I think I'm fairly safe in saying this, but you will not see a good ball striker who doesn't get their weight forward at impact. So typically what we want to see with good ball striking is we want to see the weight. It may move on to trail side and then come back forward. Some players may stay more on left side throughout the whole motion. That is a kind of a coach independent. Certain people see it in different ways. However, what we do know is for sure is that players at the moment of impact have got their weight further forward. So what we'd like to see is that we have a brief movement of the weight to the trail side, and then it starts to move back as we reach the top of our backswing. That's what's going to allow me to get my weight forward and get the low point further forward, as you can see from the numbers here. Moved it up to 6.4. When we start to move our weight the wrong way, we start to get our weight falling backwards through impact. That is when we're going to start seeing the low point too far back, and we start to see fat shots, thins, and tops as well. Okay, now we get into the complicated stuff. Component 3 is radius management. So if we imagine the golf swing, it's almost like a circle or a semicircle. Keep things nice and simple. And as an example, if I were to push my arms out away from me, lengthen everything out, basically stretch the club as far away from me as I could, that is essentially as far away as I can reach, okay? So I can't make the circle any wider than this. So if I could keep my arms straight throughout the whole motion of the golf swing, and you had a pen on the bottom of the club here, you see I'm drawing a very consistent circle, a very consistent arc, or very consistent circle. Now, the reason we don't do that is because, one, you can't create any power, because I haven't got any levers to be able to, if you like, throw the club through, get some whip, get some speed through the club head. But secondly, I'm not able to create any shaft lean. Okay? And we need some shaft lean to take some loft off to be able to get that compressed flight, okay? To be able to flight it out there and steepen the angle of attack, be able to hit down. Now, I could still get that steeper angle of attack doing this motion by moving my whole body forward. So I could get the steeper angle of attack, I could de-loft and everything. This isn't ideally the best way of doing things, but it is, as it were, it could be an option. I wouldn't recommend it. So when we actually set up for a golf shot, if you notice, when we get the ball position appropriate, so it's behind the lead shoulder, I will innately create some shaft lean if I let my arms hang down beneath me. And this is why we always want to start in setup with our irons with a slight bit of shaft lean. This can vary player to player, but we never really want to see the hands go behind the golf ball or on top of the golf ball like so. So the issue becomes that when I do this, I have essentially shortened the radius, okay? I have still got a little bit that I could reach out with. So if I were to extend my arms, straighten out my right arm, push my wrist downwards, if you like, more this way, I could still reach into the ground. So I can have this great setup position, but if I start coming down in the downswing and I start to actually get rid of my angles early, this would be what a lot of people would call scooping, I can still get the low point happening too far behind the golf ball. Now, a note on this, typically when you do this error and you hit the ground for the golf ball, it's not always the low point actually being too far back. It's actually the low point being too deep, okay? Because you basically are setting up in a way right now, I am preset with the low point slightly underground and slightly after the golf ball, because as discussed, underneath lead shoulder, and I've got that slight difference in the angle between my lead arm and the club. So if I were to make a swing and as I come down, I got rid of these angles, I could bury the club into the ground behind the golf ball. And this is why when we hit a golf shot, if we see a really well struck compressed golf shot, you're almost always going to see weight forward and the handle forward as well, because I'm keeping that radius shortened or narrowed, if you like. It does then re-extend back out, but we're looking for that post golf ball, not before golf ball. So let's say I take a really good setup here. I've got ball positions appropriate. I've got some weight forward. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of those angles. I'm going to lengthen out that radius too early by throwing my right arm out, extending my right arm out too early, too much, and I'm going to throw my wrists away as well. So I'm going to throw that club head, basically try and get the club head to go past my hands. So you can see there, of course, way behind it. And so in turn, the low point actually gets negative relative to the golf ball. So I've actually got the low point behind the golf ball there. So what is important if we want to ensure that we're getting good ball strike, good compressed strike with our irons, is that we are keeping the hands moving forward through impact. Now to display this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit a shot where I really actively drive my hands further forward. And this is a great example of where one component can affect everything. So you'll notice when I do this, I'm going to have to move my weight further forward. I'm going to have to turn more if I want to keep my hands staying ahead and get the low points further forward through that radius management. So I'm going to really handle forward all the way through, almost exaggerate it. You see, really force the issue there. And that's got my low point 8.6 forward. Now again, that is relating to how I'm moving my weight, which we discussed in the previous component, and as well you'll have seen how I move my lead shoulder really far forward. All of this is what's going to allow me to keep the hands staying ahead. This is why it's vitally important. If you are someone who is a scooper, if you are coming into your downswing and your weight is going back, it's literally going to be nigh impossible for you to get any sort of hands forward, because if you did, you're not going to reach the golf ball. So that's why players who typically hit shots off their back foot, you're almost always going to see the scoop, because they're trying to find the golf ball. If they didn't, if they kept shaft lean, they'd miss it. And your brain is always going to make a decision in terms of, I want to hit the golf ball, so I'm going to get the club head to the ball if my body is not in an appropriate position. So for this one, a nice drill, a nice idea to work on is if I were to now take the alignment stick and actually push it over towards my left heel, so my lead heel. I'm going to take my setup, and you can do this in smaller swings first of all, but simply making swings where the intention is to get your hands to the yellow stick before the club head. Okay, so that is the hands get to the yellow stick before the club head, and then we carry on through. Now, this is once again to reiterate the point. You're going to have to do other pieces. You're going to have to move your weight forward. You're going to have to start turning if you want to get the handle further forward. So a little swing here. Hands beat the club head to the yellow stick. If you do that one correctly, you'll see it fire out there nice and bullet, because you can press it, you've taken some loft off of it, and low point goes forward to 6 inches. So that's component number 3, your radius management. That one's a bit trickier. That one is dependent on a lot of other things within your golf swing. Now, the final component that we look at is swing direction. To keep this nice and easy, if we imagine the golf swing as that arc once again, so I've got this arc here, my lovely alignment stick. Swing direction is simply in which direction is this alignment stick orientated. Okay, so this would be a swing direction out to the right, so a positive one if you work off TrackMan. This would be a swing direction more to the left. Now, typically, as the swing direction goes further right, the low points will go further back. I can't stress this enough. There are other factors that will lead into this. You can have a swing direction that is out to the right and still get a low point very far forward. On the flip side, typically as the swing direction goes further left, we would see a low point that happens later. Once again, there are other variables that go into that. But this is a really good one to understand, because especially for golfers who are great with their driver and not so good with their irons, or flip it on its head, golfers who are great with their irons but not so good with their driver, usually we like to see a positive swing direction with the driver. So in other words, we'd like to see the club moving up and to the right. That may not necessarily be club path. Those are slightly different things. We don't need to get into that today. And with an iron, we would typically like to see it moving, the swing direction moving more to the left, or at least 0. Once again, there's other elements leading into that. We're not going to touch on that today. So now, as an example of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some swings. I'm going to hit some shots where I'm actively going to try and swing really far out to the right. And once again, as you watch these, you'll be able to see how my weight will move differently. My lead shoulder will be different, which is again leading to those low point changes. So this one, I'm going to try and swing as far right as I can. And turn low point 0.1, swing direction 19.5 out to the right. So I really did my job there, as it were. And that is, of course, pushing the low point further back. You can see my weight's going back. You can see my lead shoulder is dropping back as well. That's my upper center, my upper body dropping back to create that. If we then flip it on its head, and this would be the guy who's great with his irons, he can compress his irons really well, but he can't stop slicing driver typically, or he can't get the driver up in the air. This one, I'm going to try and swing as far left as I can, and really try and chop across this one. You can see innately, I'm trying to move the ball further forward to help me with this, and try and keep ball position centered here. And so with that one, we get swing direction 15 left and low point 8 inches after the golf ball. So swing direction is another element that affects this. But again, the swing direction is correlating to how I move my lead shoulder and where my weight is as well. You'll notice on that when I moved more down and left on the way through, left shoulder went further forward, weight went further forward as well. So how is that useful to us? Well, I always like this as quite a simple guideline. So if someone asked me to give quick tips on hitting a driver and hitting an iron, I would say with your driver, we're swinging up and to the right. With an iron, we're swinging down and to the left. If we're swinging down and to the left, that would bring the low point further forward and give us those more compressed golf shots. Once again, relative to what the player is currently doing and relative to other things as well. That's something I really want to stress with all this, guys, is that When we talk about these components, I'm talking about them kind of isolated. I'm talking about them on their own, despite the fact they're always linked. Some players who are already cutting across the thing, swinging down left is of course only going to make things worse. Swinging more to the right is going to be a great one for you. We have to understand that we can never really give a kind of blanket answer for all of these things, because it depends on how the person is swinging the club currently, what are they doing right now, and it also depends on what shot shape you're trying to hit. So if you are somebody who struggles with your low point, if you're struggling with flats and tops in particular, that is usually an indicator that your low point is too far back. So things you can play around with. Ball position. If you want to get the low point further forward, push the ball further back in your stance. Be careful though, as you push the ball further back, that will affect other things. Weight distribution. Where is your weight at address, and then where is it at impact? If your weight is too far back at address, you're putting a vote for being too far back as you come into the golf ball, low point further behind. If as you're hitting the shot, you're having to back up, which is something players will commonly do because they're trying to fix a problem, trying to add on loft, maybe giving yourself a chance to try and square the face. If your weight is moving further back, that's another vote for getting the low point too far back. We then had radius management. In other words, can I keep the hands leading the club head as I go through the golf ball? That's going to allow me to get the bottom of the arc happening later, as opposed to if I was to get rid of it earlier and putting the bottom of the arc further behind the golf ball. And then finally, swing direction. If I'm swinging way too far out to the right, I can push the low point too far back. If I swing down and towards the left, I can push the low point further forward. So if you want to get that low point further forward, if you are somebody who struggles with usually big blocks out to the right-hand side, flippy hooks and no compression, try out trying to move down and left through the golf ball with your hands and with the club, and you should start to see that low point get a bit further forward. Hope you enjoyed this, guys. Hope you found it useful. If you have any questions, hit me in the comments below. I'm sure this has opened up a lot of topics of conversation. I look forward to seeing some of the comments. And as always, thank you for your time. I appreciate you watching. If you've enjoyed this, if you found it useful, be sure to hit like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Share it with your mate who can't stop fatting and topping it. I think you'll find this very useful. And be sure to head to hwgolf.co.uk, my website, where you can see about booking in with me in person, online coaching, and there's some free resources on there for you as well, including a practice plan, which has drills to help you with this very problem. You can also sign up to my weekly coaching newsletter if you want to get some emails into your inbox every week with videos and information that's going to help you with your game. Thanks again.